What's up guys, it's Z here. Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling Swordsoul. I think this deck is probably the most hyped deck out of Burst of Destiny because it's a really good deck to be honest, and with a good ban list this can actually become the best deck of the format, so I think everyone should be prepared for this deck. Even if you're planning to play it or if you're planning to fight against it with another deck, you should know exactly what all of these cards do. So this profile I'm going to try to explain exactly the synergy these cards have with everything else and how you should play with them or play against them. So before we begin with the profile, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the profile. So first off, for the Swordsoul monsters, the first one, you need to max out the Swordsoul of Moye. This card is by far the best card in the deck. If it's summoned, you can just reveal a Swordsoul card or a weird monster in your hand, you special summon a token. The token is a tuner. Now this deck has the gimmick of just summoning non-tuner monsters and getting tuner tokens on the field through their effects, and this is a synchro based deck, so all of those effects, as long as you have the token on the field, you're locked into synchros, but you can just use it for a synchro summon and then you're free to do whatever you want again. So this card is basically the best starter you want to have on the field, and of course if it's used as a synchro material you can draw a card. They do get effects when they use a synchro material, and this one is by far the most economical one because you can just get back the free card you used, so it's a +1. This card gives you all the starters you need. The token is a level 4, you're gonna go for level 8 synchro at first, but usually this deck starts off with level 8 synchros and then continues playing with level 10 synchros. That's the gimmick of the deck, and you can also manipulate the levels of this deck so you can make other types of level synchros as well, which can come up in some scenarios. We have 3 copies of Incredible Ecclesia the Virtue. So this card is basically a Pancratops. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you special summon her, and then you can tribute her to special summon basically any Swordsoul monster from your deck. So it's just another 3 starters for the deck. It's a really good card. You need to max it out because the deck sometimes can be a little bit bricky, especially if your starting play gets hand trapped, so you need to have more extenders and starters so you can actually push through all those cards. We have 3 copies of Swordsoul Longyang. This card is the extender of the deck. It's a level 6 monster that gives you the level 4 token, so this is how you can summon your level 10 synchro monsters, and you can special summon this card by discarding any Swordsoul card or a weird monster from your hand. And of course, if this card is used as synchro material, it has an effect which burns your opponent for 1200. So this deck, and ironically, it's really good in time as well because it does effect. Konami just loves putting those random effects in certain cards just to promote new decks because they just don't want you to lose in time. If you're trying to pick up a new deck, they also have that in here. So yeah, you can win in time very easily with this card as well. 2 copies of Swordsoul Ataya. This card is 2 of just because it helps you go for those tokens, but only if you banish a Swordsoul card or a weird monster from your graveyard. Now, there is a way to make this your starter, but it's not a standalone card. You need to combine with other cards, and this is why I don't think you should be maxing this card, but still really good card. And of course, if it's sent to the grave as synchro material, you can send a Swordsoul card or a weird monster from your deck to the grave. And you do play a package that has a lot of synergy with a lot of those effects, and that's the Tenyi package. I've seen some builds that do not play Tenyis but play Phoenix Enforcer. You can do that if you want, but I feel like the synergy it has with the Tenyi monsters is just too good not to run in a deck. So having said that, we're playing 3 copies of Ashana. This card gives you 1 from the deck, so all the Tenyis you can special summon them from your hand. If you have no effect monsters on the field, then you link them away for the Monk, which is the link 1 vanilla monster, and then when they're in the graveyard or in your hand, you can banish them to get their effects when you control a non-effect monster. So this card special summons a Tenyi from the deck and it locks you into weird monsters. It doesn't matter too much because even without any cards like the Baroness or the Ruddy Rose Dragon, you can still go for power plays with even being locked into Worms. So this card is really good. Next up, we play 3 copies of Vishuddha. This card gives the deck a lot of going second power. It's the reason that this deck doesn't need to play too many hand drops to play or too many going second cards, because it does have cards like this, which is searchable of course, and these 2 monsters are level 7, and we do play 3 copies of Adhara, which is a level 1 tuner. So in a scenario where you don't even have a Swordsoul card in your hand, you can still go for Swordsoul plays, because for example, you can special summon your Ashana, then use its effect, then you link it away for Monk, use its effect to get either Vishuddha or Adhara from the deck, depending on which one you don't have in your hand after you summon the one in your hand, and then you have a level 7 non-tuner and level 1 tuner, and you can go for the Swordsoul level 8 synchro because it doesn't require Soulstorm monsters, it just requires weird non-tuner monsters, and this card is basically a starter, so you can go for the plays even if you don't draw any Swordsoul cards. So the Tenyi monsters add a lot of consistency in the deck, they add a lot of going second power and a lot of grindability because these cards are just too good. So yeah, I love this package and I'm choosing to run it over the Phoenix Enforcer package, but of course, again, if you liked it, if you think that Phoenix Enforcer is a card you need to play in the deck, then you can go ahead and do it, but I just don't find it necessary. Now, the only hand trap I'm playing is 3 copies of Ash Blossom. You can play more if you want because I am playing some expensive cards I'll show you later in the deck that I think are really good in this particular deck, just because this deck has 1 card combo, so you don't really care of how many cards you discard. But of course, if you want to replace those other expensive cards with more hand traps, you can go ahead and do that. I'm just playing Ash because it's the most generic one. For the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Swordsoul Emergence. This is basically the roto of the deck. You add a Swordsoul monster from your deck to your hand, but if you control a synchro monster, you can add a Wyrm monster, which can come up especially with the Tenyi cards. And if this card is banished, you can target a Swordsoul monster or a Wyrm monster, and you either increase or decrease its level by 1. Now, cards like this helps you go into other level of monsters, because if you were not relying on the effects like this, you would only be able to go for level 8 or level 10 synchro monsters. But with this card, you can go for level 7 and for level 9, which is important because there are two particular cards that you need to play in the extra deck that just add so much more power and consistency in the deck against the mirror match and against another deck that is very, very good to steal for the format. I'm going to explain when I go to the extra deck. We have one copy of Sacred Summit. This is the monster reborn. You target a Swordsoul in your graveyard, or if you control a synchro, you can target a Wyrm. You special summon it, and if it's banished, it has the same effect to increase or decrease the level. You don't need to play more than one because it's searchable if you need to, and it doesn't add too much, especially going first, unless you get completely interrupted. But yeah, this card is a decent one, and you can search it whenever you want. We play 3 copies of Vessel of Dragon Cycle. This card is a Tenyi spell that searches you all the Tenyis, but the cool thing about this card is that when you combine with Taya, it makes it a starter, because if you have nothing, this card on its own, it says send one weird monster from your deck to the grave. The extra effect is if you control a face-up non-effect monster, then you can add a Tenyi monster with a different name for the monster you send. Thing is that it doesn't send a Tenyi monster, it sends a weird monster, so you can do whatever you want with this. And even if you don't have another Tenyi in your hand to make Monk before you activate this card, because of Taya, is really good, because Taya needs to banish a weird monster from the grave or a Swordsoul monster from the grave to summon the token, and this is why this card just gives you a free Foolish Burial that can potentially do a lot more if you have the perfect hand. 3 copies of Pot of Desires. There's nothing you care about banishing in the deck. You can just play with all these cards. They're 3-offs, and the cards that you don't play as 3-offs, you don't really care about banish them at all. So Desires, I think it's a perfect draw card for this deck. You don't need Prosperity. You can kind of play it, but the problem is that the extra deck just adds so much utility in the deck, and you do go through your extra deck very fast, especially during the grind game, so I would not want to banish any of them, so just Desires I think is really good. I'm playing 3 copies of Droplet. Now, these 5 cards, of course, you can replace them with hand traps like I mentioned before, but I am playing them because I just think that before you play any hand traps in the deck, you need to consider all your options of how of going second, and if you really need hand traps, and how good your deck synergizes with Droplet, especially because this card in the right deck is very, very broken. If you can just afford to discard stuff, or if your deck has 1-card combos, which this deck can do both of what I mentioned, this card just becomes so much better, because the Tenyi monsters get their effects in the graveyard as well, and you do have 1-card combos with Moye and Ecclesia, so you don't really mind, even if you discard your entire hand to negate a full field, just summoning a Moye is going to give you the play you need, so this is why I love playing this card in the deck. I'm also playing 2 copies of Talents. I did not find space to max this, but I don't think it's necessary. This card is really good, but again, if you don't have it, you can play more hand traps. I just like this card because this deck sometimes, if it gets interrupted on its first summon, just drawing the extender just means your opponent just wasting the hand trap. This is why this card is really good, because for example, if your Moye gets Veilered, but you don't have a way to get access to your Long Yuan, then you need to draw that or the Searcher in order to go for the extra plays. And we also played 2 copies of Swordsoul Blackout. This is the only trap in the deck, and I think 2 is the ratio for me. I've been testing 3 to be honest. This is basically the Icarus attack of the deck. You target a Wyrm you control and cards your opponent controls, you destroy them, and if this card is banished, it gives you a token. Now, 3 can seem right because this card is so powerful. The problem is that it just requires you to do something in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're just popping one of the monsters you don't really need to. And in order to make the most value out of this card, you need to pop cards like Yazi, which you can very easily summon because of the level manipulation, so you can get another monster out of your deck. It's a really good card, but it's searchable, so I don't think you need to play 3. The deck can bring out a lot of interruptions even without relying on this card, so this is why I think 2 has been working really well so far. For the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Chixiao. This card is the Searcher of the deck. This card is the one that makes the Tenyi package super worth for me, because it gives you something going first, because usually the Tenyis don't do much going first, but in this deck they can, because of Adhara being a tuner and Vishuddha being a level 7 non-tuner, so you can summon this, which is not a generic level 8 synchro, but it requires Wyrm non-tuners, so this is what the Tenyis are, and it gives you a search. So if it's summoned, you can add to your hand or banish a Swordsoul card from your deck. Banishing can sometimes work during the late game because of those manipulations effects, but early game you just want to get to your hand whatever you need. And as a quick effect, you can banish a Swordsoul card or a Wyrm monster from your hand or graveyard, and then you can target an effect monster on the field and negates the effect for the turn. So it's not only a card that searches you, but it's also an interruption. So this card is absolutely fantastic, and I think 2 copies, you need to play them because you're gonna go through both of them during most of your games. We play 1 copy of Chenging. This card is the level 10 monster. You don't summon this too often. I would think that you would summon this more often than you do, but to be honest, this card is okay, but the problem with this card is that if you don't activate Desires, you don't have that much of a reason to summon it, because I find myself that the main reason I'm summoning this card is for the effect that for each banished card, it gains 100 attack and defense, and it decreases your opponent's monster's attack and defense by 100. So this card, usually when you have activated 1 or even maybe 2 Desires, it can give you a really good push, but the effect, I think, gets at Klaus by Baroness, because it says that, of course, if it will be destroyed by card effect, you can banish a card from your graveyard instead, and if a card is banished, except during the damage step, you can banish a card from your opponent's field and your opponent's graveyard. It's a good effect, but Baroness just does so much more. So unless you're locked into worms, which sometimes you will because of Ashina, then you can summon anything else. But this card, if you activate Desires early, and even if you activate a second one, which in this deck is actually tempting to activate a second Desires because of this effect, it can give you a really big boost, especially if your opponent has a lot of monsters in attack mode, then you can just decrease all of their attack by 1,000 or even 2,000 points. So this is why this card is here. It's a really good card, but you don't summon this as often as you would think. Speaking of Baroness, we have one copy of Baroness de Fleur. This card, I think, absolutely makes the deck. It's just ironic that this card came out pretty much the same time as Swordsoul's, and it just makes the deck work, because this card, not only does it give you an interruption, but it gives you a follow-up, because its effect to negate, it's only once while this card is face up on the field. But the thing is that during this standby phase, you can target a level 9 or lower monster in your grave, you return this card back to the extra deck, and then you special summon the monster. So this is why you don't need more than one copy, because this card is going to put itself back every single turn unless it gets negated. And also, it just gives you another monster back from the graveyard, and if you use this during your standby phase, which most of the times it's going to be during your standby phase, because during your opponent's standby phase you don't want to use that because you still haven't used the negate, and this is why you can just basically not rely on any top deck, just bring back whatever you need and keep playing. And it also has an effect to pop a monster during your own turn. So this card, it doesn't even pop a monster, it pops a card. So this card, even going first or going second, it has its uses. It's a very powerful card all around. One copy of Ratty Rose Dragon. This card is mainly against for Drytrons because you need to banish their entire graveyard. I guess it can work against Tri-Brigades too, but they can fill their graveyard very easily. But if Drytrons have a setup, if you can just bait some negates and then banish their entire graveyard, they're not going to be able to do anything afterwards because their entire resources lie in the graveyard. They don't have anything in their hand most of the times. So this is why this card is a good card to play, because it's a level 10 monster. We played 2 copies of Baxia. I think Baxia has found its place because this card on paper it sounds too broken. It just didn't have until now the best deck to play in, because ever since Dangalong got banned, we didn't have really good ways to summon this. But now we just summon this very easily because it's a level 8 worm monster, and you can use this card going second to break boards very easily. Same thing with Yazi. Yazi basically does the same thing, but not as powerful. The cool thing about Yazi is that you can combo this with Blackout, so you can get another monster out of your deck, because when it's destroyed, you can get a worm monster from your deck. So yeah, this card is really good. I do play some more level 8 monsters just to have the ability to use them, and the first one is Dragite, because Moye is a water monster, so you can actually use the negation effect. And if you want, you can also play Nibiru, and if you side Nibiru, you can actually use this card's second effect as well to excavate the top 5, and if you reveal a rock monster, you can just bounce cards. So if you main or side Nibiru, this effect can come up too. We play 1 Draco Berserker. I love this card when I'm trying to play around Gamma. If I've seen my opponent has Gamma game 1, then game 2, usually if I have the plays, I will summon this with Moye if they don't Gamma it immediately, and then I can just play around the Gamma, because this banishes a monster when it activates, and Gamma needs to hit the field along with Driver in order to negate, so this is why this card plays around that. Now for the monsters that you can summon when you manipulate the levels, the first one after Yazi of course, it's Shooting Riser Dragon. Now this card is here because of Token Collector. Usually you're gonna be siding Token Collector, especially when this deck becomes more popular, which I guarantee you that it's going to become very soon. So you can just send Token Collector with this card to the graveyard from your deck, and Token Collector can special summon itself from the graveyard during the next turn when your opponent starts summoning tokens, so you can interrupt them this way. So this is why this card is here. And we also play 1 copy of Chao Feng. You can use its effect to lock your opponent's effects with Baxia because it's light, so against Drytron this card can become an auto win, but also it can search you your Ash Blossom because it searches you a tuner when it's destroyed, so you can have synergy with that as well. So this card is really good in certain scenarios. We don't play too many Link monsters, just a couple Tenyi monsters. We play 2 copies of Monk. You can play 3 because sometimes I find myself that I need the third one, but I just decided to play all those other cards just to add more utility. But this card, when you're going for the grind game with the Tennis, then sometimes the third one can't come up, so I would highly recommend trying it out of 2 and then see for yourself if you need the third one or not. But I think 2 is okay, so you can just get all those Tenyi effects. And we also play 1 copy of Shaman. Shaman is the one that I'm summoning most of the time when I'm trying to go for a grindy combo, when I'm trying to push through hand traps, because if you don't get hand traps, Shaman, you can sometimes go away without summoning her, but her effect is really good when you get hand traps, so you can bring back other monsters, because sometimes you can discard something and bring it back right away. You don't have to bring back something else, so this is why this card is really good. And since it requires 2 weird monsters, you can use it with Swordsoul as well, and this is why this card is really good in the deck. So yep, that's the deck guys. Swordsouls, I think everyone should be aware that this deck is going to become really good eventually. I'm hoping that the ban list is actually not as harsh as people actually predict that it is, because if it is, then this deck can completely take over the meta because it's so powerful, and there's no way it's going to get hit during the next ban list because it's too soon. So yeah, you should know what this deck does. If you want to play it, then it's a great deck to play. If you want to play against it, then there are certain weaknesses that you need to capitalize, like being able to destroy the tokens. Token Collector, I think it's a card that's going to see a lot play going forward, so you should be looking out for that. So yep, that's the deck guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.